Okay, I will now read from Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. He entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there, named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector, and he was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass through that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down, as he was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Zacchaeus, so associated with children that sometimes we forget not everybody grew up in the church or singing that song. In fact, my seminary friend Penina came to faith in her late teens and early 20s. So when it came time in New Testament class for us to translate the story of Zacchaeus, the professor from years of practice knew to let this class sing the Zacchaeus song just to get it out of their system, and all sang loudly with abandon. In fact, this is your opportunity should you wish to join in, and we can sing the Zacchaeus song. And it goes like this. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. And when the Savior passed that way, he looked up and he said, "Zacchaeus, you come down, for I'm going to your house today. For I'm going to your house today." And Penina had not grown up in the church, so she was like befuddled why everybody was singing this strange song about Zacchaeus. And perhaps sometimes, since we learned this song as a kid, or we associate this story with being children, that sometimes that is kind of the only eyes in which we can see them through. Sometimes perhaps we miss another side of the story. And I was kind of reminded of this a few years ago. I was at Ghost Ranch. I was at a conference on gratitude where we got a peek into this story from a different angle. And we were with Diana Butler Bass, who has kind of commented on kind of Christianity in America and all around. And one of the things she did is she kind of was developing also this book called Grateful, which I have over here. And the conference was kind of talking about that. And there's a whole kind of really long section about Zacchaeus. And so we went through that. And so it was interesting to see and kind of the story as they unfolded in kind of the frame of being grateful. So first, who is Zacchaeus? Well, we know he's a wee little man who climbs up for the Lord he wanted to see. That's how the song goes. And he could be a dwarf. Maybe he's just short. We don't know. We do know that he is a climber, which Diana Butler Bass kind of made a reference that he is actually, kind of a social climber. We think of just literally as a climber. In fact, I've preached this text a couple times, and sometimes there's, I tell stories about climbing trees, falling out of trees, all other things. But we also need to know in kind of his setting, Zacchaeus is a social climber. The position of tax collector was kind of a gateway to the middle class Roman lifestyle. It was kind of the stepping stone to make it into the Roman upper class. In fact, a lot of people's families had originally gotten their start as tax collectors. In fact, St. Patrick of Ireland, who converted the island of Ireland, originally his family had been tax collectors, and they had kind of moved their ways up. And the tax collector positions could either be bought or you could inherit yours like St. Patrick. But Zacchaeus is kind of on his road to being a middle-class Roman. He's not kind of one of these peons who is just kind of like working in a field or doing something like that, but he's kind of working his way up. And he is good at tax collecting because we hear that he is rich. And we also have to understand, like, tax collecting was a little bit different back then. Tax collectors got paid because they would collect tax, but they would collect a little bit more, or maybe they would lie to kind of both sides. It's like, I know you have to pay this much, but if you pay this much, I'll let you get away with that or whatever. And so you get kind of kickback. So the position as tax collector is also a position that's not very kind of savory either, because you're kind of cheating rich people. You're also cheating poor people. You're trying to collect enough from both where you can make a good living. And so as one of the things that happens is tax collectors are despised by their neighbors, whether they're higher up on the social ladder or lower on the social ladder. And Zacchaeus is described as the chief tax collector in Jericho. Jericho is a good-sized town on a trade route, so he's probably doing pretty well. And this also means, though, since he's kind of on the edge of Roman society, is that he is kind of part of the system. And part of this kind of has some a little bit kind of deeper thing too. He's part of a system or an institution where, kind of human law also will trump God's law. So the more religious people also who have to pay taxes as well, they have kind of another reason not to like him. He kind of represents the Roman state religion, kind of all this, kind of paganness. And one of the issues always at the time in that era is, do you pay taxes to Rome or do you pay it to the temple in Jerusalem? So you have kind of this extra kind of thing going on where not only could he be kind of a political traitor or a religious traitor because he's choosing Rome over Jerusalem. Now, Diana Butler Bass, as she was writing her book, also found that we as a church have not really focused that much on the theology of being grateful or thankful. In fact, she said when she was kind of doing the research for this book, and as I just tried to explain a little bit, is actually kind of gratefulness has kind of a tendency with politics and gratefulness, especially in the Roman era. And it was also seen as being grateful as a moral obligation, but also a kind of political reality. If you did not support the people or the party that supported you, you were considered ungrateful. You were supposed to support your team, your people, your, endeavor. In fact, the emperor, as kind of the head of the Roman world, and several even thought they were divine. There's always every now and then somebody wants to name their horse council, or they want to break the rules and consider themselves divine, which creates problems for Jewish folks and Christians and during the Roman Empire. But one of the things that was said is they kind of see kind of a political gratefulness as kind of the gifts flowing down from the emperor, and this usually takes the place of kind of protection from barbarians, roads, courts. And then the people are supposed to be grateful, and they do show that in the form of taxes. So their support, their loyalty kind of comes up. And Zacchaeus is kind of the middleman in this position. So people showed their gratitude also by kind of knowing their place in the hierarchy, which of course the emperor was in charge. Well, this cycle, though, we see kind of the boldness of Jesus, because the higher person in Roman society always invites the lower person or the lower status person. So Zacchaeus, theoretically and also physically at this time, is also the highest person. He is in the tree. But he is also from a higher social strata, so he's the one who's supposed to invite kind of the unemployed Galilean day laborer turned rabbi Jesus. And Jesus is supposed to be grateful that this rich Roman tax collector is kind of giving him the time of day, at least according to kind of the Roman way of looking at things. And what happens next is Jesus turns the table because Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house for dinner. Yeah, try doing that next time to a billionaire politician comes to town. I just don't think that's going to happen. But we would be welcomed probably by private security or maybe some other folks. But Jesus gets away with it, and we see Jesus eating with the chief tax collector, and that'll make some more religious-minded people a little bit mad. But during the dinner, if we look at the conversation between Zacchaeus and Jesus, first we see kind of Zacchaeus is overwhelming haughty. You know, it might look kind of like he's showing off a little bit. He's saying, look at me, I am so good, I can give half of what I owe and kind of just give it away. Likewise, if you can find someone that I have ripped off, he will generously pay back what has been offered. And on the surface, it looks like he is kind of daring Jesus. Yet, if we look a little bit deeper, Zacchaeus is a tax collector. You know, ripping people off is what he does. He literally is the best guy at this. So when Zacchaeus is saying that he's going to give his money away, when he's going to give back 4 times of what he has stolen, kind of what he is doing is he is going to bankrupt himself. He's going to kind of throw off his Roman identity for a new one. He is being dangerously generous, giving away all his wealth without abandon. You know, Zacchaeus, like we said, is kind of throwing off his Romanness and taking on this invitation to sit at Jesus' table. And we see kind of Jesus' reaction in our text, and Jesus is being a bit punny. This is where I usually point at Corey Riojas, because if you ever spent a little bit of time with him, he always likes puns. But yes, Jesus has kind of this cheesy pun, because he tells Zacchaeus that salvation has come to his house today. And Jesus' name in Hebrew means salvation. So he's kind of being just punny about this whole situation. So Jesus, by bringing himself, is bringing salvation into his house. And he also reminds the crowd that Zacchaeus is a true son of Abraham. He is a true Israelite, and like Abraham, Zacchaeus is trusting God. He is giving all that he has away. He trusts that God will give him a living, and has responded in this encounter with Jesus that his life will now be taking a new trajectory. Now, this story this week also reminded me of a challenging author. It kind of reminded me about, because I've been thinking about the last couple weeks as I kind of was talking with one of the ministries that we support here, the campus ministry up at Fort Lewis with the Native American folk there. And I remember reading a few years ago from a professor from Colorado University, and he was writing a book about Native American, and the Christian faith. And in it, he explains that many Christians, especially our more evangelical friends, or kind of the people that are interested in saving souls, measure faith by a marked change of life. And this author, Vine Deloria, was saying one of the difficulties that some of the Native practitioners notice, which is also possibly why a part of the population, only about 10 to 3% are Christian, is that when they kind of are engaged and ask and they talk about the life-changingness of Jesus, they say that many of the people they encounter, their lives do not change that much. And by that, we can kind of infer that kind of Zacchaeus and this story of gratitude and generosity is something we don't see often, which is probably why is an example here in the Bible. Now, perhaps we can also do, as we think about leaving here, is how do we live a life of gratitude and generosity? What does that look like? Now, a classic example of personal gratitude and obligation are thank you letters. In fact, I thought it was really great. Barb was putting some of those back there for talking about Tom. I was thinking about that as we kind of had our graduates scholarships. We were starting to announce those. And yes, our graduates will be sending announcements soon, or at least should be sending announcements soon. And with our graduates, we either attend, we politely respond with cards, perhaps something with a little cash or some Venmo included. Graduates always love that. And we will also respond with another card, maybe a little bit fancier, to say thank you. Our graduates will be doing that. And then we enter in kind of this age-old question, this age-old dance, is how many cards can one send? Have you ever gotten that where you're sending a thank you card for a thank you card, and then you got to send a thank you card for that thank you card? And then sometimes in the old days, it was a little bit easy. You just became pen pals and constantly started out with, I thank you for whatever I did last. But when we send these out, it is a personal decision to decide how generous we are in life. Some will kind of just do this out of obligation. Others may be feeling overwhelmingly generous, as with Zacchaeus' case. And there is also a kind of collective and personal gratefulness as well. What was great in the book, Diana Butler-Bass had kind of this big chart, but I knew I was pushing it a little bit too much with the slides anyways today. But one of the things that she was saying is when she was talking about collective gratefulness and personal gratefulness is that there was kind of an interesting example she had just gone through while she was writing this book. And one of the ways she explained or gave kind of an example of this was she wrote the book in 2016, and that year the Chicago Cubs won the World Series. They finally won the World Series after a drought since 1908. It was something of a miracle, and Chicago was grateful. So the players got a bonus check. The Cubs owners and management threw a big party. The ball players kind of expected signs of this. You know, in their contract, you usually have, we win the World Series or we win the pennant, we get a bit of a bonus. And so they were totally expecting for just kind of the team to celebrate. But what they did not expect was kind of the personal, but also the collective town of Chicago was showing their gratefulness. The town was ecstatic. It was literally kind of the best news that Chicago had in 2016. What struck the players the most was also fans were coming up and giving kind of personal stories and thanking them personally. And at first, kind of the players were just kind of playing off with like, yeah, we won. Yeah, it's been a while. But then some of those interactions got a little bit deeper. In fact, some of the players got a little uncomfortable because the fans would come up and they would thank them. And then they would sit there and be like, well, I also want to thank you on behalf of my brother. He died of cancer, and the one thing we always kind of wished was seeing the Cubs win the World Series. They would come up and share how they wished their dad had lived to see their win. Many would open up about the generations of daytime games they had spent at Wrigley Field. You would have grandmothers and great-grandmothers, kind of grandpas talking about how they had waited so long to see the Cubbies win. And you usually got stories about people who are no longer with them, or perhaps stories about their own family. And the players did not kind of know what to do. You know, they signed up for a bonus if you won the World Series, but now anytime that they were in Chicago, they were just having random people telling personal and also the collective stories. And at first, this kind of seems a little bit unbelievable. In fact, I kind of rolled my eyes the first time when I kind of heard Diana talking about this, but then I also had to remember back to my grandpa's farm where there was a raggedy old baseball. And it was a foul ball he got when he was in a sailor's uniform in the 1940s because he caught a foul ball at a game at Wrigley between trains when he was getting shipped out to war. And I imagine there are kind of many different people or many different things we can think about being personally and collectively grateful. Now, this kind of translates into a church in a different way. It's something that David and I kind of experience. Usually, I experience it on Friday. That's when I'm working on a sermon. I get a phone call, and it's always a genealogy buff. And I know this is usually going to take about 10 minutes, you know, kind of a thing. But I also notice every now and then you'll see somebody trying to get into the sanctuary, and so I'll go over and usually going to give them a quick tour, and that's when you usually hear a story about how they were baptized in 19-something, or perhaps they share a memory that they were grateful of how grandma told them a story about a pastor or maybe the people in this congregation, and so they had to see the place for themselves. It's also kind of those days when the ushers recognize there's a little bit extra money in the plate before they get there, and it's also kind of a way that people can share and be grateful. One of the things we talk about in this transition time is how we are individually grateful, how we are grateful as a community, how the impact throughout history and time our congregation has on people here and now, in the past, and we plan for the future. And as we get ready to finally end today, we have to ask ourselves is how do we embody this generosity? For Zacchaeus, it was giving up all that he had gained in the Roman system. But it will be different from each and every one of us. Perhaps we are not card people and you're just getting one thank you card and you're lucky to get that one thank you card. Yet, in time and discernment, we can also see how generous that we can be. One of the things that I love about this story is Jesus is reminding everybody that Zacchaeus has that same faith of Abraham, that Zacchaeus has the same faith that we all have. And in generosity and love, we hope that we can share that faith for many years to come.